Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your Kiwi Connection here, Kidmo7, and today we have another R9 290 Showdown. This time it's going to be the XFX Double Dissipation R9 290 up against Sapphire's Tri-X R9 290. Now, this will be quite interesting because the XFX card is running at stock speeds, so this one will be more of a battle of the coolers and things like that. But there is still a benefit to getting this XFX card over a reference card, even though the speeds are the same, and that is obviously because the cooler is better, it's less likely to throttle, so you're more likely to get 100% of the performance rather than, say, 95% of the performance. But we'll have to see how it does. So first up, the differences between these cards. As I said, the XFX card is running at stock speeds, so that means 947 megahertz on the GPU and 5000 megahertz on the memory, as opposed to the Tri-X, which has a memory GPU clock of 1000 megahertz or 1 gigahertz and a memory speed of 5200 megahertz. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but not too much of a difference. There's also a difference in size. So at first glance I thought the XFX card looked very slim, but it's interesting to note that the Tri-X is actually a bit thinner. So the Tri-X comes down at 305 millimeters long compared to the XFX, which is 294 millimeters long, to be expected, 2-fan versus 3-fan. Then in width, the Tri-X comes in 113 millimeters wide compared to the 143 millimeters wide of the XFX. So XFX card's quite a bit wider. And also the Tri-X is 38 millimeters high to the XFX's 41.9 millimeters high, so just call it 42. So that was the interesting one because it looked really slim. So the XFX card's shorter than the Tri-X, but it's a little bit fatter. But looking at the heat sinks on it, they're not very big, so it must just be fans and other things that have really beefed it out, so to speak. There's also a light on the bottom of the XFX card which looks really good. Although it's a bit, well, it's interesting. Most graphics cards have the light on the side where you can see it through a case window, where the XFX one's pointing straight down, I guess illuminating your power supply. I guess if you had another card under it, it might look good, but yeah, so a little bit interesting there. There's also issues with the XFX card and getting it in and out. So the screws at the back of the case, which are there to help support the graphics card, so it's just not sitting on the slot, they're really hard to get in and out. The cooler kind of juts out there, and it's just a little bit difficult. And also getting the 8-pin and 6-pin connectors in and out, well, getting them in was easy, but getting them out, the heatsink sort of juts out a bit and you can't really get it out unless you might be able to get a fingernail under it and pull it out, but I had to use a little screwdriver, flathead, and just wedge that underneath it to get it out, so that was a bit more difficult as well. Anywho, let's get straight into the benchmarks then. So first up is Firmark. So this is 1080p, 15 minutes, 4 times MSAA. The XFX Double Dissipation scored 35 frames per second average. The Tri-X also scored 35 frames per second average. So exactly the same in that one. Next up is Unigine Valley. This is on the Extreme HD preset. The XFX 56.8 frames per second average. The Tri-X 58.8 frames per second average. So 2 frames there for the Tri-X. Now, another Unigine, this time Heaven 4.0. This is DirectX 11, everything maxed out 1080p. The XFX Double Dissipation, 50.5 frames per second average. The Tri-X, 52.1 frames per second average, so staying with that theme, about 2 frames. A little bit less that time. Heaven 4.0 again, this time OpenGL, once again everything maxed out. The XFX, 36 frames per second average. The Tri-X 37.2 frames per second average. Now, into some games. So, Tomb Raider, this is everything maxed out without VSync. The XFX Double Dissipation, 73.3 frames per second average. The Sapphire Tri-X, 78.1. So that was a bit bigger of a gap there, a lot more than I thought I'd see. So the Tri-X really pulling away in Tomb Raider. And lastly, Bioshock Infinite. This is everything maxed out. The XFX Double Dissipation, 110 frames per second average. The Tri-X, 113.9. So call that about 4 frames in Bioshock. So you can see the Tri-X pulls ahead a little bit. In Tomb Raider it was a decent amount. But yeah, on average say maybe 2 to 4 frames per second better on the Tri-X over the XFX card. So a good little win there for the Tri-X, but that is to be expected given that the Tri-X has got a slightly higher GPU speed and slightly higher memory speed. Now to the interesting part, the temperatures. So this XFX card has had, just like the Asus card, a lot of complaints and rumors and things about it that the cooling on it is very inadequate. And to be honest, that wasn't really the case. I was really surprised. So in Furmark, during the whole 15-minute benchmark, the highest I saw on the XFX Double Dissipation was 78 degrees Celsius. And that was at 80% fan speed max. So yeah, the fan speed was getting up there, but that's not that bad. That's actually pretty good. Especially when a lot of people were saying that the XFX card, the Double Dissipation, cools the same or worse than a reference card. Obviously, if you remember from my reference video, the reference card runs up to 94 degrees, 95 degrees in my Furmark benchmark. So that was quite interesting. The Tri-X, on the other hand, that ran up to 79 degrees Celsius. Before you start jumping up and down, that it actually scored worse. That was at 46% fan speed max. So the Tri-X ran 1 degree hotter, but it was at almost half the fan speed. So definitely a win in the Tri-X in terms of temperatures. I also took the temperatures in Heaven 4.0, and the XFX Double Dissipation scored 70 degrees Celsius compared to the 74 degrees Celsius of the Tri-X. That was the highest temperatures I saw in that benchmark. So what do I think of this? It's actually quite interesting, but this XFX card struggles with the same thing that the Gigabyte card has, is that it does deliver decent cooling, but at very high fan speeds, especially compared to the Tri-X. So the Tri-X has to win. I mean, if you put the Tri-X at the same fan speed or on the same fan curve, it would score a lot better. And remember that the Tri-X is clocked higher too, so it's going to be outputting more heat. So this is definitely a win for the Tri-X. But as I said, I was surprised. The XFX card didn't do as bad as a lot of people seem to think it will do. It actually did a lot better than the Asus DirectC 2 card. So I was quite interested by that. Into noise now. So as I just said, a lot of a very high fan speed on that XFX card, but the noise wasn't too bad actually. Both of these cards were pretty much silent at idle and just general use, and in high load and in gaming and that, they weren't too bad. So this is what the XFX Double Dissipation sounds like at idle. And this is what the Tri-X sounds like at idle. So not much difference there. They're both pretty much silent. Now this is them both again on load. This is during the Unigine Valley Extreme HD benchmark. So first up is the XFX Double Dissipation. and here is the Tri-X. So I couldn't really notice too much difference in this, and I'm actually surprised given the higher fan speed of the XFX card. Yeah, maybe it's a bit higher, but there's actually not too much in it, and given that it's a 3-fan design versus a 2-fan design, I was quite surprised by that, so, you know, that was interesting. Now, overall, what do I have to say about this card? So I was pleasantly surprised by the XFX card. I actually like the look of it a lot. It looks really good. It felt a little, I don't know what it was, it felt a little bit flimsy, and as I said, the packaging was quite poor on the XFX card and the lack of accessories, especially compared to the Tri-X. And the Tri-X pretty much beats it in every sense in terms of the benchmarks and in temperatures and cooling, and you're obviously going to be able to overclock the Tri-X a lot more because you have a lot more room to play with in terms of, you know, running aggressive fan curves and that, where the XFX is already running at quite high fan speeds from the factory. So it has to go to the Tri-X. Now, would I recommend this XFX card over a reference one? Well, I can tell you already, the XFX card does do better than the reference R9290 because it isn't throttling as much. It can, you know, it's got better cooling, so it can allow those the GPU to run at its full speed all the time. Just for reference, I'm just going to throw one out there. Let's just say Tomb Raider. The reference R9290 scored 72.3 compared to the XFX Double Dissipation got 73.3, so about 1 frame better there, and it's got about 2 frames better in Bioshock. So it gets a few frames better than the reference R9290 purely because it won't be throttling anywhere near as much. So you could count on, if you had a reference R9290, you went to the XFX, you could maybe count maybe 2, 3, 4 frames per second better. But think that the Tri-X is, you know, 3, 4 frames per second better than the XFX. So honestly, I just say you're better off getting either the Tri-X or a reference R9290 and just run an aggressive fan curve on it. Because I found with my own one that you can actually see performance benefits just by running a custom fan curve, a more aggressive one than the factory one. And you can see performance benefits in your reference 290. So I'd honestly say it's probably not worth spending the extra money unless you could get this XFX Double Dissipation at the same price as a reference 290. Then do that. Also, if you're overclocking, then you know you can obviously overclock the XFX card a lot more than the reference one. For the people not interested in overclocking, I just say go for the reference 290 if you don't want to spend the extra money, or just get the Tri-X because the Tri-X easily wins in this, and the Tri-X remains the second best R9290 I've tested thus far, behind the Power Color PCS Plus, which is the best 290 I have tested so far. So I hope this was educational. I hope you really enjoyed this video. It was quite a surprise to me, so hopefully it was a bit of a surprise to you. And I'll see you guys next time.